And we also need to pay attention to whether a particular function is a primary function, something that's really important, or something that's maybe minor or not used that often, but still essential to operation. So again, you think of DeFi, the ability to verify that images are being transmitted and displayed properly. That's a primary functionality. Without that, you can't make any kind of claim of interoperability. But then when you think of bus turnaround, that's not necessarily something that is going to be noticed by the user. It's not something that's going to be used. It's not a function that's going to be used as often as sending data, pixel data to a display. However, can we really say that a device or two devices are interoperable if they can't perform bus turnaround together, even though it's a minor function? No. So we want to make sure that our interoperability test is hitting all of the important parts. And so if we design our test properly, we can actually do this. So one thing that we've done and added to our display interoperability test is a test to verify how quickly a system, a peripheral and a host, can perform a bus turnaround successfully. So we don't just want to have the host perform a bus turnaround, have the display report back, and then turn the bus around again and say we're done. Instead, we wanted to isolate the functionality of the time in between a request occurring and a bus turnaround. So we actually have a test in the DSI interoperability test suite that has people vary the time between when they make a particular request, have the host generate some kind of read request to a panel, and then wait a particular amount of time and then perform bus turnaround. And what we found is that as we vary that time, especially as the time gets shorter, some peripherals have a difficult time responding properly to the request that's made. I think I have a little bit more about this test on a later slide, so I'll hold off on that for now. As I said, when we're doing conformance testing, you're testing a device. You're focusing on a very specific single device on its own. But when you're doing interoperability testing, you're testing a system. You're testing two or more devices together and a given test channel. So that's an important thing to keep in mind, that the interop tests are telling us how well a system, a collection of devices, is working. And we can change the system simply by changing the test channel that they're being connected across. And so we've created some test fixtures to allow us to do this. This one is a TLIS board, transmission line interconnect structure. That's what TLIS stands for. Essentially what it does is it's a worst case channel that DeFi devices can connect over. And so if we're doing interoperability testing, we may connect a panel and a host over an ideal channel using high-quality connectors, high-quality cables. And we prove that it works. Great. But now we should try it again in a more difficult environment. And that's what the TLIS board is for. You can substitute the TLIS board in, and now you're testing the same panel and the same host over a much more difficult channel. So you've changed the system. Next, I'll talk about interop efforts today, what's going on. As I mentioned before, interop test specifications are available on the MIPI testing resources page. Anybody can download those, use those, implement them, provide feedback on them. That's a resource that's available today. We've also done 4 Interop workshops for displays to date, and we've also done Interop workshops in Unipro, Camera, and BIF. Now this next couple slides illustrate some of the things that we learned from doing Interop workshops. What this slide is it shows the average HS data rate of devices, or test cases performed rather, at the past 4 Interop workshops for displays. And as you'd expect, the trend is up, right? Devices are getting faster over time. So the first Interop workshop was held back in 2009. Average speed of test cases performed there, 320 megabit. The one we performed just 2 months ago, March of 2012, almost double that, 612 megabits. So over time, we're seeing that DeFi devices are getting faster. And that's what we'd expect. But not only are they getting faster, but also their overall throughput is improving. So what this chart shows is the total throughput that devices are capable of for each test case at the past 4 Interop workshops. And so for the first 3, you see that they are steadily increasing. And that kind of matches what we saw on the previous slide, that, well, devices are getting faster. So of course their throughput is increasing as well. But the throughput isn't just the speed, or the HS data rate. It's the HS data rate times the number of lanes. And so what this shows us is that in the past, we had a lot of 1- and 2-lane devices that were getting faster. But at this last event, we saw a big jump in the number of devices doing 4 lanes of D5. And so that's why you see a big jump in the throughput. So these Interop workshops give us kind of a snapshot of what's happening in the industry and what people are implementing. So it can yield some kind of interesting little tidbits like that. That was one just from this past Interop workshop, just to give you an idea of what kind of things that we can learn at these events. Also at these events, and this is the test I was referring to before, we can uncover problems and then feed them back into the work group. So that test that I described before, where we vary the time between a host making a request and bus turnaround, that time was too short. As I said earlier, we saw cases where peripherals weren't able to respond correctly if they weren't given enough time. And so we added this to the Interoperability Test Suite, and then we performed this test on a number of different host and peripheral combinations at the Interop Workshop. And we came to kind of see what the trend was. And then we were able to make a recommendation to the display work group that they should include this bus turnaround timer into the specification. And so if you look at the DSI spec today, there is this BTA timer in there. And essentially all it is it's just asking peripheral companies to define what this time T can be. How long do they need between a request happening and a bus turnaround being received? So this was a case where we were running into an interoperability problem. We created a test for it, performed it at an Interop workshop, and then fed that data back to the work group to actually provide a clarification of the specification. So that's another important aspect of these Interop workshops, and is to help improve and clarify the specifications. So what actually happens at an Interop workshop? Well, we'll invite the host and peripheral companies, and we'll give them a schedule of who they're going to work with at what time during the week. And this is the group photo from the last Interop workshop we did in March. And they'll have a time set aside for each host with each peripheral, and they're going to try and perform the tests that are defined in the Interop Test Suite document. So it's important for them to be familiar with the contents of that and have prepared their devices to be able to do those tests. Also on the peripheral side, one really important thing that we do is from all of the peripheral companies, now I'm talking about panels in this case, since this was a display Interop workshop, they have to provide the initialization sequence for their particular panel to the hosts that are going to be coming to that event as well, so that ahead of time they can prepare their product to send the necessary initialization sequence, the necessary sequence of DSI or DCS commands to enable those panels. So they can do some of the work ahead of time so that when we actually get to the event, they can very quickly be able to send the sequence and get the panel up and running. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of what actually happens during the event. As we perform those tests, we're going to collect the results and we're going to compile those into reports for each individual company that attended the event, so that they can leave the event with a report that says exactly what products they tested with, under what configurations, and what kind of results that they had. So they can use that to really demonstrate that they've done interoperability testing. In addition to the Interop workshops that we do, we also are trying to build an interoperability testbed at UNH-IOL, so that we'll have a number of different implementations available there at the lab, so that people can use that kind of as a standing Interop workshop that's available throughout the year, as opposed to having to wait for the next Interop workshop. And the idea is to collect a number of different peripheral devices and let that testbed grow over time. In the future, MIPI Interop events that we're looking to plan and have: LLI, Unipro, CSI3, BIF again, and DSI over D5 again as well. So that concludes the discussion about interoperability testing. Were there any questions on that? About how we do it, the metrics, Interop test specifications, Interop workshops? All right. Well, in conclusion, pay attention to what's happening in the test investigation group. That's going to be a hub of activity and information surrounding the test within MIPI Alliance. Be sure to check the test resources page for the CTS documents, Interop documents, and so forth. And of course, if you're preparing to do testing internally with your partners, at a lab, at an Interop workshop, pay attention to the test preparation documents and test modes to be sure that you have everything that you need. If you have questions about that, I'm working in the test investigation group, so you can feel free to contact me if you have a more specific question about what you're testing.